Hey, everybody, and welcome to Dear Mr. Potter. I'm Alistair Stevens, and this is our second episode of our third season, our second episode discussing Prisoner of Azkaban. Tonight, we turn our attention to the third and fourth chapters as Harry catches the night bus, realizes that perhaps he isn't in as much trouble as he thought, or at least not in the same kind of trouble as he thought, and is finally reunited with his friends in Diagon Alley. We're not going to make it to Hogwarts just yet. There's a slow burn start to Prisoner of Azkaban, but it just heightens our expectation and excitement for next week and our final return to Hogwarts. It is great to have you all here. We've got a few new people with us tonight. We've got Alexander and Carolina and Josh are all with us for the first time tonight. Those are the ones I saw in the YouTube chat. It is great to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, along with Becca and Karen and Dry Heaving Llamas and Nikki and Angela Laree is here and Aaron is here. It's great to have you all with us. There's a lot to discuss tonight because last time we talked a little about the ways in which the first two chapters of Prisoner of Azkaban kind of alter our understanding of Harry's place in the world and the relationship between the wizarding world on the one hand and the muggle world on the other. Rob is new too. I'm being informed in the YouTube chat by Rob. Hello, Rob. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm thrilled to have you here. I hope that you enjoy your first adventure with us here on Dear Mr. Potter. The YouTube chat moves fast, but you know, we can all keep up. You can contribute live, by the way, during the session in the YouTube chat or on Twitter using the hashtag Dear Mr. Potter, DearMrPotter. I can see those scrolling here along the side of my screen too, so we can keep up with the conversation on multiple platforms because that's how adept we are. So as I was saying, last time we talked a little about the ways in which Prisoner of Azkaban kind of teaches us to reinterpret the wizarding world and the muggle world, and that is going to continue through tonight's reading. But it's going to take a darker tone, a darker aspect, and we are going to be encouraged to challenge the structures of authority themselves, which is a bold deviation for the Harry Potter series. Up until this point, we have absolutely kind of respected the codified structures of authority. If you are a teacher, then you are capital G good, unless you are evidently not, like demonstrably and self-evidently not. We're taught to respect those structures of authority, and that is going to start to come apart here in these two chapters, and that of course is only going to act as a preface really for the rest of the novel. We're also going to draw some connections, more explicit connections, between Harry and the eponymous Prisoner of Azkaban. Though it will be a good long while before we meet him, we're already going to compare Harry's situation and his. So we're going to begin hot on the heels of the inflation of Harry's aunt at the end of chapter 2, with Harry alone by the side of the road, and then we'll see what happens next. Let's open up. Oh, before we get into this, I should apologize right up front and say that there was a slight scheduling mistake with this week's session. Literally 5 minutes after the Point North the Point North newsletter went out this morning saying that the session was going to take place at 9 p.m. Eastern, I had to move it to 10 p.m. Eastern. I apologize for that. You can always keep up to date with the latest changes either via Twitter, where all the changes are announced. You can follow at Point North Media over there, or you can make sure that you are up to the minute by heading over to pointnorthmedia.com, clicking the podcasts button, and there you will find the broadcast calendar. That's good for the next couple of weeks. I think it's going to actually, yes, into September, I think, as of right now. If there are any changes, they are reflected immediately in the calendar. I go over and move things around so that you can get up to the minute information there. And you can also subscribe to that calendar on your mobile device. You can get notifications from that calendar. You can do all kinds of clever things to make sure that you always have the latest information. Unfortunately, sometimes life gets in the way, but I try to maintain a certain amount of consistency. And for the record, for at least the next few weeks, the Dear Mr. Potter sessions will be taking place at 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central Time. That's going to be true for at least next week's session and session 4. I will try and move around a little after that so that we can have some, more European-friendly time zones, some more Australian-friendly time zones. That might be fun to have. Maybe even just Eastern-friendly time zones. I know that 10 p.m. is a little late for some of you, so we'll do what we can to try and accommodate as many people as possible. But for the next couple of weeks, 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central. With all of that said, let's get into our first slide here. Harry was several streets away before he collapsed onto a low wall in Magnolia Crescent, panting from the effort of dragging his trunk. He sat quite still, anger still surging through him, listening to the frantic thumping of his heart. But after 10 minutes alone in the dark street, a new emotion overtook him. Panic. Whichever way he looked at it, he had never been in a worse fix. He was stranded, quite alone in the dark Muggle world with absolutely nowhere to go. And the worst of it was, he had just done serious magic, which meant that he was almost certainly expelled from Hogwarts. He had broken the decree for the restriction of underage wizardry so badly, he was surprised Ministry of Magic representatives weren't swooping down on him where he sat. Harry shivered and looked up and down Magnolia Crescent. What was going to happen to him? Would he be arrested, or would he simply be outlawed from the wizarding world? He thought of Ron and Hermione, and his heart sank even lower. Harry was sure that, criminal or not, Ron and Hermione would want to help him now, but they were both abroad, and with Hedwig gone, he had no means of contacting them. Harry faces the consequences of his actions. He is certain now that he is going to be punished for inflating Aunt Marge, for engaging in this kind of accidental magic. But his framing of this is fascinating. We're not entirely sure. Serious panic, says the Ocean Palace. Very nice. We might question Harry's assertion there in the second paragraph. 10 minutes alone in the dark street, a new emotion overtook him. Panic. Whichever way he looked at it, he had never been in a worse fix. Well, okay, Harry. I mean, things are bad. You didn't perhaps behave as well as you could, though I'm sure we understand why you took the action, the involuntary, spontaneous action that you took. But you've been in worse fixes than this. You have faced down he who shall not be named. You were facing down he who shall not be named when you were still a baby, for goodness sake. I mean, you survived the curse that killed your parents. This is not so bad. But the panic that Harry is feeling is a sign of the fact that he is still embedded, enmeshed in the Muggle world. Here he is sitting in the most mundane street, at least nominatively, the most mundane street imaginable. Magnolia Crescent has no association with the wizarding world. It is as Muggle can be. If you kind of distill down Muggleness, if you got the raw ichor that was Muggleness, it would probably be called Magnolia Crescent. This is as suburban as it can possibly be, more suburban even than Privet Drive. But Harry is now alone. He's longing for Ron and Hermione. He knows that Ron and Hermione would protect him, would be loyal to him. Loyalty, of course, another major theme as we're moving through the book here. But really what he's thinking about is his disconnection from the wizarding world. And this reflects exactly what we were discussing last week. Here we see the Muggle world as threatening, the Muggle world as being darker, specifically darker, explicitly darker than the Wizarding world. The Wizarding world might be more dangerous, but it is also more wondrous. The Muggle world just has a lack of hope. It has a lack of specialness to it, and Harry does not belong here. There is a sense in which being isolated in the Muggle world, and I think the thought of being alone in the Muggle world now and then more permanently alone in the Muggle world, if he is expelled from Hogwarts, if he is, as he says, outlawed from the wizarding world, that permanent condition of being alone in the Muggle world would be far worse than anything that he has faced at Hogwarts. This is literally a fate worse than death. And that goes a long way toward kind of confirming and also continuing to explore this idea that we introduced in the first two chapters, this idea that actually the Muggle world is not real. The Muggle world is not the kind of de facto standard of reality. The Muggle world is not the status quo, and the wizarding world is not the exception to that status quo. Actually, the situation is inverted. The wizarding world is everywhere. It is mysterious and it is pervasive. And the Muggle world is safe and secure and sequestered and secluded. It is hidden away. It is kind of tucked inside the wizarding world in a way that is progressive and fascinating for our understanding of the evolution of Rowling's vision, but in a way that is completely, contrary to our understanding of the Muggle world in the first two books. And as I said last time, that's not just a retcon. This isn't J.K. Rowling just deciding that, no, actually, she got it wrong the first time around. This is more interesting. I think that is true in part, but it is also crucially reflective of Harry's evolving perspective on the world. The wizarding world now is not strange. I mean, it is strange, but it isn't novel in the way that it was. It's not a respite from his mundane life. It is actually home. We can see that start to develop through Chamber of Secrets. Home, of course, being one of the most important themes in Chamber of Secrets, home and family together. So we've seen this happen to Harry, and the transition is now complete. Here he is on the dark street, all alone, and this is about as bad as it gets. Fina's asking an interesting question. If Harry was expelled, would he have to go to Stonewall High after all? I'm not at all sure how this works. The kind of point of reference that we have here for expulsion from Hogwarts is, of course, Hagrid. During the initial opening of the Chamber of Secrets, Hagrid is, accused of this terrible crime and is kind of expelled from Hogwarts. He certainly has his wand taken from him and snapped, but he still exists within the frame of that world. And certainly no one seems to question his connection with the world. No one says to Hagrid at any point, well, no, you're not a part of this world anymore. You have to go and live with the Muggles. And there is some evidence in the text that this is partly a consequence of the intercession of Albus Dumbledore. That seems to be, textual and kind of framed not just in the flashbacks that we get, but in the ongoing relationship between Dumbledore and Hagrid. But I'm not at all sure what would happen to Harry if he were actually expelled, or what would happen to Harry if he were genuinely exiled from the wizarding world, because the idea of exile speaks again to that first book, second book idea that the wizarding world is secluded and the Muggle world is dominant. You can be exiled from a secluded kind of insular community into a wider world, but you can't be exiled from the wider world into the smaller world, if that makes sense, because the metaphor there isn't exile, it's imprisonment. It's crucially and vitally imprisonment. Already in this book, we've already nodded at this in the first reading last week, but we're continuing to draw parallels between the prisoner of Azkaban, about whom as yet we know nothing, except that the book is entitled The Prisoner of Azkaban, and we've had some suggestions that he's out there in the world. But we're already drawing parallels between that prisoner and Harry, and his position in the world, his kind of position, his relationship with and kind of position with regard to the structure of law and kind of social civility in that sense, and also his sense of belonging, his sense of identity fundamentally. Harry now is a wizard. He's not a boy who goes to a wizarding school, but he is a wizard. This is his identity, and therefore the separation of that identity would be absolutely crucial. Rob says here in the YouTube chat, I wonder if you get kicked out of school if you could become an accidental squib, or you're just a Hagrid and have limited magic. Well, we're going to talk about the functions of magic in just a little while, because we're going to get another perspective on magic that kind of clarifies and illuminates some of the discussions that we've had previously, and certainly some of the inferences that we may have drawn through the first couple of books. But yeah, that's entirely possible. Yeah. Let me see. Yes, Sabrina says, are no other teenagers performing any accidental magic over the summer break? Is Harry's case so unusual? That seems unlikely given adolescents' emotional states, but it seems Harry is the only case. Well, we can debate whether or not Harry is the only case by the time that we get to Cornelius Fudge right at the end of this chapter, because there are some suggestions there, I think, that in fact, no, this happens all the time. And the injunction against juvenile magic in the Muggle world is one of those rules that isn't ever really expected to be effective. We're not going to stop teenagers from casting spells or from committing accidental magic within the Muggle frame just by passing this law, just by making this rule, but we can at least de-emphasize it. We can at least minimize the damage that is done. Again, we'll talk about all of that as we go. Alan says it must be possible to teach oneself magic, else where did the first wizard learn it? I like that very much. Yes, well, we know that wizards can practice magic even if they're unaware that magic exists in the world. Certainly there are accounts in the first book of Harry doing exactly that. I mean, the most notable is the glass on the cage for the boa constrictor when we visit the zoo right at the beginning of the first book. That is clearly an instance of accidental magic. There's that account in the first book of Harry transporting himself, firing himself off to the roof of the school or whatever it is when he's attacked by bullies. I don't think I'm remembering the details of that entirely correctly, but that's a similar instance. We also got glimpses of Tom Riddle back in Chamber of Secrets. We get momentary mentions of his kind of early experimentations with magic before he knew that it was a thing, that it was possible. So yes, it is certainly possible for magic to occur, but there we're drawing a distinction between spontaneous emotional magic and the kind of craft of magic. Is it possible for someone with magical potential to cause magical effects in the world around them? Yes, demonstrably so. We have seen textual proof of that. Is it possible for someone possessed of that skill but without the necessary training or knowledge to cast a spell, a formal spell? Well, probably not. Not least of all because it seems absolutely definite that the casting of formal spells requires a wand. The wand is the tool of the witch or the wizard. That is a necessary component of spell casting. That is some kind of we can speculate about how exactly that works, but it seems to be some kind of focal point for the transmission of magical energy. It's some kind of lensing effect, perhaps, for the transmission of magical energy. So it seems unlikely that a wizard, no matter how talented, could spontaneously, arrive at actual spells, actual charms, actual curses, actual potions. I mean, you're right. It must have happened once, I mean, people with magical potential must have banded together 1,000 years ago, more than 1,000 years ago. Hogwarts is 1,000 years old, for goodness sake. So more than 1,000 years ago, people with magical potential must have banded together and kind of formalized the rules of magic, shared their understanding in exactly the same way as we did, I suppose, with our understanding of chemistry or of physics or of any other kind of scientific or pseudoscientific structure. That seems to be true. That seems to be suggested, if not outright stated by the text. So yes, but I don't know what would happen to Harry. And Harry's association with the wizarding world is, in this book specifically, much less about magic. It's much less about the cool spells that he can cast and the cool tricks that he can do, and much more about community and family and identity. That again marks a kind of trans-adolescent shift there in Rowling's storytelling, as she is having Harry move through his adolescent experience. She is giving him the kinds of experiences that are common to adolescents, even those adolescents who don't go to magical wizarding schools in Scotland. Let's move on to the next slide here and the arrival of the night bus. Dylan the Joel says, magic doesn't require ones. We learn about that later. Yes, there is a kind of, again, we're kind of drawing lines of distinction here between formal types of magic and kind of more powerful raw types of magic. Again, we'll draw back to that in due course, yeah. As Dumble David says, what a strange school Hogwarts is. Here are life lessons to make you a first-class wizard. Now make sure that you don't practice or apply those lessons. Well, make sure that you don't apply or practice those lessons in the Muggle world. I mean, this is not the life experience that most wizards are going to have. This isn't even the life experience that most wizards are having now, But certainly by the time Harry matures and graduates, this is going to be a very different experience. Yeah, good. This then is our second slide. He bent over his trunk again, but almost immediately stood up once more, his hand clenched on his wand. He had sensed rather than heard it. Someone or something was standing in the narrow gap between the garage and the fence behind him. Harry squinted at the black alleyway. If only it would move, then he'd know whether it was just a stray cat or something else. Lumos, Harry muttered, and a light appeared at the end of his wand, almost dazzling him. He held it high over his head, and the pebble-dashed walls of number 2 suddenly sparkled. The garage door gleamed, and between them Harry saw, quite distinctly, the hulking outline of something very big, with wide, gleaming eyes. Harry stepped backward. His legs hit his trunk and he tripped. His wand flew out of his hand as he flung out an arm to break his fall, and he landed hard in the gutter. There was a deafening bang, and Harry threw up his hands to shield his eyes against a sudden blinding light. With a yell, he rolled back onto the pavement just in time. A second later, a gigantic pair of wheels and headlights screeched to a halt exactly where Harry had just been lying. They belonged, as Harry saw when he raised his head, to a triple-decker, violently purple bus, which had appeared out of thin air. Gold lettering over the windshield spelled, "The Night Bus." Let's take this question from Rob here in the YouTube chat. Where does the night bus fall as a threshold? It seems like a roaming magic bus within the Muggle world is just a magical convenience, but it drops him off right at the first threshold. The night bus is absolutely a kind of threshold transit system. Yes, it is every bit as powerful as passing through the wall at platform 9 3/4 at King's Cross for Harry. What is different about the night bus is that it isn't a part of the Hogwarts-oriented juvenile wizard experience. This is a part of the wider wizarding world again. Harry is being tested now almost as an adult. And before we go back to talk about the mysterious shadow that is lurking between the garage and the wall there, let's talk about the night bus itself, because we're going to be told that it appears when it is summoned, effectively. You throw up your arm and the night bus pulls up, which seems impractical, which seems implausible. but there definitely can't be any kind of consciousness mechanic behind that. That is to say that it would be very different if the mechanism to summon the night bus was to throw your arm in the air and think of the night bus. That would be great. That would be effective, and that would resolve the problem. But that wouldn't be any good for Harry right now because he doesn't know about it. Except that this may be another instance of accidental magic. This may be another situation in which Harry is intuitively channeling some magical potential, some magical power in order to accomplish his goal. He doesn't necessarily want the glass around the snake's cage at the zoo to disappear. He doesn't necessarily want Aunt Marge to inflate, but he is moving toward his purpose there. He wants something to happen, and he wants the night bus to happen, and it is possible that he spontaneously generates whatever signal it is to summon the aforementioned night bus. Or, by this point in the book, we may be wondering whether that's entirely true. We'll circle back around to that at the end of Harry's journey on the night bus. But let's look first at this moment of fear. He bent over his trunk again, but almost immediately stood up once more, his hand clenched on his wand. He had sensed rather than heard it. He has this immediate sensation, this prickling on the back of the neck, this idea that he is being watched, that there is a presence nearby. And again, following on from that first slide, this is the Muggle world. He's not thinking immediately of magical danger. He is thinking immediately of magical defense. That's why his hand closes around his wand. That is how he is prepared to deal with any kind of danger, but we're still in the Muggle realm here. The Muggle realm is dark and oppressive and dangerous for Harry right now. Then, Lumos. He doesn't hesitate to cast another spell, you'll notice. He's just thinking, I cast serious magic, and I'm going to be exiled, and I'm going to be kicked out of the school, and it's all going to be terrible, and my life is over. Hey, wait, is there a shadow? Lumos. He's right back into it. Harry is a wizard. And here we begin to get a sense of how the structures of laws that surround us can constrain us and can specifically constrain the exceptional. We've been talking about this since page 1 of book 1 of Harry Potter here on Dear Mr. Potter. Harry is exceptional. So the rules that govern other people do not govern him. He isn't necessarily bound by the same expectations, isn't necessarily bound by the same conventions. He is, capital S, special. So through this book, we're going to look at the ways, particularly through the lens of crime and punishment, we're going to look at the ways in which society interacts with the individual. And through Harry, we're going to very subtly challenge our notions even of kind of societal structural rigidity. Even if we can agree that, okay, the system isn't perfect, but the system has to exist, we're still urged to question, well, in that case, how does Harry exist within this system? His latent and natural exceptionalism challenge his position there. Merging Puppy asks an interesting question here. What are your thoughts on the wizard's use of the bus? For a culture that seems to be steeped in the past, the use of a bus feels very contemporary. Well, it does a little bit. It's interesting. I'm not in love with the night bus the way that I think many readers of Harry Potter are, and I think it's for exactly this reason. It feels to me less a part of the wizarding world than many other parts, but let's remember, the Hogwarts Express is a pretty fundamental part of the wizarding world. It's not that wizards are naturally, hostile to technology. They're certainly not, hostile to technological convention. They will use it, absolutely. And the idea of a garish purple triple-decker bus, careering through the streets of London, that actually does kind of work historically. Buses have been around for a good long while, so it seems not medieval in that sense, and certainly we're challenging our understanding even of that, that underlying concept that we saw in the first couple of books in the pages of Prisoner of Azkaban. It doesn't feel quite that old, but it feels old enough. It doesn't feel progressive in the same way. Though this does raise a really interesting question, because by the time we get to Diagon Alley, and I didn't pull this as a slide, so I'll kind of veer off into this now. By the time that we get to Diagon Alley and in chapter 4, and Harry is kind of having his perfect summer holiday experience, just kind of browsing around and shopping, and he sees the new Firebolt broom. We are presented with this idea that the Firebolt broom is a significant improvement over previous brooms. And that's completely consistent with our understanding of broom technology in the wizarding world, if technology is the right word to use here. Though even the way that the firebolt is described suggests that no, actually, technology is exactly the right word. It is an incremental upgrade. It is tuned and designed in exactly the same way as your new laptop is or your new iPhone is. It is that kind of, progressive industrial design that delivers a better product at a premium price. But that seems odd in the context of the broader wizarding world too. Wizards can't have a stagnant society. We know for a fact that they don't have a stagnant society because new technology comes along every couple of years. It isn't simply the case that Harry's broom had more powerful spells cast upon it, or if it is that case, if that is what made, the Nimbus 2000 and then the Firebolt, better than other kinds of brooms, then that is because someone out there is developing new spells. We're still progressing technologically. We're still, and technologically here in the broadest sense of the word, we're progressing scientifically, if you like. We're increasing our understanding and we're getting better at what we do. And that's very significant. Because again, that whole medieval perspective on wizarding, the whole idea of Hogwarts as this castle in Scotland with a great hall and paintings hanging on every surface, and that is an old-fashioned idea that kind of stands in opposition to progression, societal, cultural, communal progression. But then we're reminded that Hogwarts is a school, that Harry's experience of the wizarding world has been almost entirely enforced, structuralized by this educational establishment. They want to preserve certain virtues, and this is true, I think, of exactly that same impulse that says that the most elite private schools are the ones in the oldest buildings. The most elite private schools are the ones with the greatest respect for their heritage, and the ones which are perhaps slowest to adapt to new technology and to new kind of ways of doing things. It's possible. Yeah, Alan asks in the YouTube chat, does magic become obsolete to new spells? Will there be new magic that wizards develop throughout the books? Everything about the socioeconomic structure of the wizarding world suggests that yes, that is exactly the case. Harry has to go and buy new textbooks. He has to go and buy new editions of existing textbooks. The fact that there is a bookstore dedicated to, if not outright dedicated, at least dedicated in part to the sale of textbooks, suggests that yes, information is continuing to accumulate. People are still advancing the magical arts and the magical sciences in this world. That seems to be completely clear. That's represented pretty much everywhere you turn in the wizarding world of Harry Potter. All right, let's move on and take a look at the night bus itself. We'll just, put a pin in this ominous shadow that is lurking there in the garage. The hulking outline of something very big with wide gleaming eyes. So Harry stumbles backward, throws out his arm, his wand leaves his hand, and boom, the night bus is there. Let's take a look at our next slide. So Harry boards the night bus, and then we go off on our way. Yes. This is interesting. Alexander says in the YouTube chat, magic isn't really something ever mastered in Harry Potter. Dumbledore is always curious and investigating things he doesn't understand. That's a really great observation, Alexander. Yes, I think it is absolutely fair to say that the spirit of the wizards in whom we are supposed to see represented most effectively the virtues of the wizarding world, the spirit there is the spirit of the gentleman scientist, the natural philosopher. This is an era of advancement and exploration, which is perhaps kind of at odds with an institution that has been around for 1,000 years, but we don't know how magic works. It is entirely possible that magic continues to evolve. And it's entirely possible, we can frame this a little bit by saying that maybe there are kind of foundational, kind of subsurface elements to magic that we are not privy to, that magic itself changes. It may well be that a particular spell is less effective over time, or that, some tidal force of magic in the universe ebbs very, very slowly, and new magics become more powerful than the old magics, or old magics may have some kind of resurgence. There may be all kinds of kind of pseudo-cosmological kind of underpinnings there that we just aren't given any access to at all. It's an interesting thing about which we might speculate. Yeah. All right, let's take a look here at our next slide. Take her away, Ern, said Stan, sitting down in the armchair next to Ernie's. There was another tremendous bang, and the next moment Harry found himself flat on his bed, thrown backward by the speed of the night bus. Pulling himself up, Harry stared out of the dark window and saw that they were now bowling along a completely different street. Stan was watching Harry's stunned face with great enjoyment. "This is where we was before you flagged us down," he said. "Where were we, Ern? Somewhere in Wales?" Said Ernie. "How come the muggles don't hear the bus?" said Harry. "Them," said Stan contemptuously. "Don't listen properly, do they? Don't look properly either. Never notice nothing, they don't." Best go wake up Madam Marsh, Stan," said Ern. "We'll be in Abergavenny in a minute." And disappeared up a narrow wooden staircase. Harry was still looking out of the window, feeling increasingly nervous. Ernie didn't seem to have mastered the use of a steering wheel. The night bus kept mounting the pavement, but it didn't hit anything. Lines of lampposts, mailboxes, and trash cans jumped out of its way as it approached and backed into position once it had passed. If you guys have been with me from the beginning of Harry Potter, then the beginning of Dear Mr. Potter, I should say, then you will immediately expect me to highlight that line right in the middle of the slide. "How come the muggles don't hear the bus?" said Harry. "Them," said Stan contemptuously. "Don't listen properly, do they? Don't look properly either. Never notice nothing, they don't." We've talked about the ways in which the muggle world is kind of complicit in its transparency too in the first two books, and kind of, gosh, almost subjugation by in the third book and subsequent books. The ways in which the muggle world is separated from the wizarding world. It seems to be semi or pseudo-conscious. It seems to be semi-deliberate that the muggle world is blind. They just don't see the wider world around them. And when they are exposed to it, they will move away from it. They will turn in another direction. This is, to borrow from Douglas Adams, this is an SEP. This is someone else's problem. This is not something that I myself have to think about. And Dry Heaving Llama says, "Stan is the author's way to handwave that to the reader." I do think that's fair. I do think that's true. It certainly gives J.K. Rowling the opportunity to do something pretty cool. You know, it's something that we haven't seen before in Harry Potter, but I also find it completely consistent. Okay, consider this. How many children go to Hogwarts every year through Platform 9 3/4 at King's Cross? Well, we don't know how many children go to Hogwarts every year. That is still a question of enormous controversy, but let's say it's 50. Let's just say it's 50. That means over the course of generously a 90-minute period, twice a year, 50 children are going to spill through a brick wall in King's Cross Station, the most crowded railway station in all of Britain. 50 children just going to pour through a wall, never minding parents and luggage and cages with owls in and cages with rats in and who knows what all else. Never mind supplying the train. Never mind the people who work on the train. That seems completely implausible at first blush. But then again, it's entirely possible if the people who are there just don't notice, if they just don't see. Now, we might speculate that that is partly a function of magic itself, that there is something embedded in, the fabric of the wizarding world that makes it harder to spot, or it might simply be a function of the muggle mind. If wizards, as is presented to us within the frame of this book, if wizards are actually the real world, if the wizarding world in general is more real than the muggle world, is certainly more broad than the muggle world, is more pervasive than the muggle world, rather than there being something special about wizards, there's something wrong with muggles. That muggles are closed off to the world. They're closed off to the potential of magic. I mean, that's definitive. But they may also be closed off to those things which we associate with magic, those things which we associate with, the realm of fairy in traditional fairy stories. It may be that they are closed off to awe and to wonder. It's certainly possible. That, I think, is maybe a darker read than J.K. Rowling might have intended, but certainly from Harry's adolescent perspective, that makes so much intuitive, emotional sense. Which adolescents among us have not, looked at our parents or our teachers or at the people who live in our street, the people who live in our neighborhood, and said, "What is wrong with you people? Why are you so jaded? Why are you so dulled by the world, by experience? The world is amazing and everything is raw and everything is brand new and I feel every feeling at 110%. Why don't you?" Well, because adolescence, mercifully, doesn't last forever. Adolescence, mercifully, fades into a kind of comfortable middle age. And most of us, I think, are pretty good with that because adolescence probably lasts long enough as it is. And there is something to be said, even in our later years, even in our adult years, for the preservation of wonder and the preservation of awe. But Muggles may not have that. They may not see that. So we get here also some hints about the mechanism of the night bus itself. So they're barreling through Wales when Harry throws up his arm and summons them. They are transported to London. Harry gets back on the bus. There is another bang, and they're back in Wales again. They're approaching Abergavenny. Why is that the mechanic by which the night bus travels? What does the bang signify? Well, it seems as though the bang signifies a sudden dislocation, a sudden lack of continuity of location, if you like, that they immediately travel, and the bang may be, scientifically, maybe displaced air, maybe some kind of wormhole effect that carries them to their destination. So they will stop immediately, pick up a passenger, and then go back to where they were. And there are some questions. Well, if the night bus can go from place to place spontaneously, if it can happen anytime, why does it have beds? Why is anyone spending that much time on a bus that can magically appear wherever you want to appear? And that seems to be fair, except that the bang effect, if you like, this sudden transportative effect, may be more difficult, may be more expensive, may just be something that doesn't happen very often. Yeah. Yes, the Ocean Palace says the bang represents apparition, and disapparition. Yes, yeah. Yeah, good. And Josh says adults can have childlike curiosity, though. Yes, absolutely. I want to kind of, I guess I should probably distinguish that a little, kind of draw a line of clarification there. Yes, adults absolutely can and absolutely should, I would argue. I think that that is one of the things that fantasy fiction in particular can engender within us, is this sense of awe, this sense of wonder, this sense of curiosity, the sense of exploration. When J.R.R. Tolkien was talking in his essay on fairy stories about the constellations of fantasy, that sense of recovery is one of the most important things that he lists. We recover our ability to see the world with fresh eyes. That is one of the things that stories can do for us. It's certainly one of the things that Harry Potter has done for us for 20 years now. It restores that sense of wonder. So yes, adults absolutely can. I wonder if, Rowling is kind of separating out, if you like, kind of metaphorically separating out society here. The underlying metaphor of Harry Potter, the underlying metaphor of magic is in some sense wonder, is in some sense awe, is in some sense curiosity, which would certainly fit with all of the discussions that we had earlier about the gentleman adventurer, gentleman scientist, natural philosopher kind of approach to magic that we seem to get. Yeah. Okay. Let's keep going and push on to our next slide. Did I say everything I wanted to say about that? I think I did, yes. Oh, we get our newspaper now. Here we are. This is our first real description of what is happening to the prisoner of Azkaban. Black still at large. Sirius Black, possibly the most infamous prisoner ever to be held in Azkaban Fortress, is still eluding capture, the Ministry of Magic confirmed today. "We're doing all we can to recapture Black," said the Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge, this morning, "and we beg the magical community to remain calm." Fudge has been criticized by some members of the International Federation of Warlocks for informing the Muggle Prime Minister of the crisis. "But really, I had to, don't you know," said an irritable Fudge. "Black is mad. He's a danger to anyone who crosses him, magic or Muggle. I have the Prime Minister's assurance that he will not breathe a word of Black's true identity to anyone, and let's face it, who would believe him if he did?" While Muggles have been told that Black is carrying a gun, a kind of metal wand that Muggles use to kill each other, the magical community lives in fear of a massacre like that of 12 years ago, when Black murdered 13 people with a single curse. We're getting a very strong sense here of Sirius Black's reputation, of his place in the world. Look at the descriptive terms that we get. The most infamous prisoner ever to be held in Azkaban Fortress. This is important. This is huge. And we also get, another beat of this changing dynamic between the wizarding world and the Muggle world. The International Federation of Warlocks is being critical of Cornelius Fudge for informing the Muggle Prime Minister of the crisis. This is an absolute and damn near outright inversion of the kind of political structure that was implied in the first two books, where the Ministry of Magic exists as this tiny little, subset of the British government, that it's a kind of, even quasi-legalistic structure there. Here we're getting a much broader sense. No, we're handling this. Why would you bother to tell the Muggle Prime Minister about this? And, In Britain, that would be a huge thing. You know, that's the idea that you would withhold information from the prime minister is very serious. That's kind of you know, a stark rejection of the formalized structures of Muggle society in Britain. But here, no, we should be handling this. They've been critical of him for informing the Muggle prime minister of the crisis. And Fudge, you know, responds without, it is my duty as a loyal citizen of you know, Her Majesty's kingdom to inform the prime minister. No, I'm not a servant of this guy. No, none of that. Instead, well, really, I had to, don't you know? Black is mad. He's a danger to anyone who crosses him, magic or Muggle. I have the Prime Minister's assurance he will not breathe a word of Black's true identity to anyone, which, parenthetically, means that the Prime Minister cannot actually meaningfully address Sirius Black as a threat. Because if you don't know that he is a wizard, if you don't know that he is magically powered, then you are never going to be able to stop him or avoid him or stand in his way at all. So the Prime Minister can't help, but he can warn. And again, we get the suggestion that it is the wizarding world that has been real the whole time. Carolina asks a really interesting question. So Muggle leadership is informed when a crisis is underway. Are they obliviated when the crisis passes? Gosh, possibly. Right? I mean, it's entirely possible that Cornelius Fudge goes back to number 10 Downing Street and just, you know, sorry about all this. I'm just going to wipe your memory of this entire affair. And then the next time he has to go, because the next time something terrible happens in the world, you know, possibly in a couple of books' time, the next time that a prisoner escapes from Azkaban, he has to go back to number 10 Downing Street and say, so, Prime Minister, let's begin with the basics. Magic is real. I'm a wizard. There are all of these structures in place. We don't know, honestly, what the relationship is like on an ongoing basis. Yeah. And we're going to kind of continue to evolve that through the rest of the series. Yes. Good. All right. Let's, yeah, as Alison says, the sixth book says otherwise. Yes. As I said, we're going to continue to evolve this through the rest of the series. Yes. Rohit says, can you guys imagine Churchill talking to the Minister of Magic, trying to hit him with his cane and bowler hat? I could believe that Churchill was also the Minister for Magic. You know, I like to think that he kind of crossed the aisle there. It's entirely possible. Okay, so that is our glimpse of the newspaper. Black murdered 13 people with a single curse. And again, we get a little beat of that kind of wizard, Muggle, you know, the translation gap between these two cultures. While Muggles have been told that Black is carrying a gun, a kind of metal wand that Muggles use to kill each other. Wait a minute. Guns have been around for centuries. Wizards don't have guns. They don't have cannons. They don't have muskets. They don't have gunpowder. They don't have fireworks. Are wizards so completely unfamiliar with the terminology of the Muggle world that word doesn't exist? That seems implausible. And yet it's right there in text. There would be no reason for the newspaper to make that clear if guns did exist in the wizarding world. So it is entirely possible that rather than leaning into, you know, the kind of Tolkienian idea that, you know, Gandalf is a master of fireworks, not just because of his magic, but also because of his, you know, inclinations toward chemistry, that actually, no, wizards have never needed to develop, or not even develop, but have never needed to absorb from their Muggle neighbors this kind of weapons technology. That's fascinating. Yeah. Yeah. Rohit says, I think it might be the Daily Prophet being unnecessarily patronizing and a little academic about it. It's possible, but in that case, I would expect a more accurate and less metaphorical, less kind of directly communicative comparison. While Muggles have been told that Black is carrying a gun, a type of weapon common to Muggles who use them to murder each other, that would make more sense than a kind of metal wand. A kind of metal wand suggests that wands are simply the kind of default modes of interaction in the wizarding world, that any action that is taken by a wizard that influences the outside world happens via wand, which again comes back to this idea of you know, formalized magic focused through the wand. That seems to be consistent. Yeah. Failing Daily Prophet peddling more liberal propaganda and propping up low energy Fudge, says Merging Puppy. Oh, today's a bad day to make that joke. I mean, I appreciate it, but good Lord, you guys, today's been a tough day for hashtag fake news and so on and so forth. Let's dispense with such awful thoughts. And as Fina says, this might just be an early Rita Skeeter piece. We don't know. Yeah, it could be. It doesn't quite suit her style, actually. I'd expect something a little more explosive. Yeah, interesting. Let's push on then to the arrival of Cornelius Fudge. I am Cornelius Fudge, Harry, the Minister of Magic. Harry already knew this, of course. He had seen Fudge once before, but he had been wearing his father's invisibility cloak at the time. Fudge wasn't to know that. Tom the innkeeper reappeared, wearing an apron over his nightshirt and bearing a tray of tea and crumpets. He placed the tray on a table between Fudge and Harry and left the parlor, closing the door behind him. Well, Harry, said Fudge, pouring out tea, you've had us all in a right flap, I don't mind telling you. Running away from your aunt and uncle's house like that, I'd started to think. But you're safe, and that's what matters. Fudge buttered himself a crumpet and pushed the plate toward Harry. Eat, Harry, you look dead on your feet. Now then, you'll be pleased to hear that we have dealt with the unfortunate blowing up of Miss Marjorie Dursley. 2 members of the Accidental Magic Reversal Squad were dispatched to Privet Drive a few hours ago. Miss Dursley has been punctured and her memory has been modified. She has no recollection of the incident at all. So that's that, and no harm done. Fudge smiled at Harry over the rim of his teacup, rather like an uncle surveying a favorite nephew. Harry, who couldn't believe his ears, opened his mouth to speak, couldn't think of anything to say, and closed it again. I'm worried about the reaction of your aunt and uncle, said Fudge. Well, I won't deny that they are extremely angry, Harry, but they're prepared to take you back next summer as long as you stay at Hogwarts for the Christmas and Easter holidays. Well, thank goodness that he'll be allowed to return to the Dursleys. So I mentioned earlier that Harry's summoning of the night bus may be an example of accidental magic. It may also, yes, superficially, just be a kind of convention, a kind of understanding that wizards have that is, kind of casually or accidentally observed by Harry there on the side of the road. But it may be something else. Harry gives a false name. He gives Neville Longbottom's name when he gets on the night bus, and yet when he arrives at Diagon Alley, there Cornelius Fudge is, and he clearly seems to be expecting him. Is it possible, then, that Cornelius Fudge dispatched the night bus to go get Harry? Is it possible, then, that when Harry is fearful of representatives of the Ministry of Magic descending upon him on the dark street, is it possible that they were, in fact, nearby? But that rather than trying to sweep Harry up, perhaps, some of the representatives of the Ministry of Magic are engaged in other activities right now. Perhaps dispatching the night bus was the easiest way of getting Harry to safety. It's a curious point of speculation, at least. I do like this little beat right at the beginning. I'm Cornelius Fudge, Harry, the Minister of Magic. Harry already knew this, of course. He had seen Fudge once before, but as he'd been wearing his father's invisibility cloak at the time, Fudge wasn't to know that. Hello, Mr. Fudge. We're meeting now for the first time. This is our formal introduction. I don't know you at all. The other thing that we see here, though, that is perhaps most important for our understanding is the introduction of the Accidental Magic Reversal Squad. 2 members of the Accidental Magic Reversal Squad were dispatched to Privet Drive a few hours ago. Miss Dursley has been punctured, and her memory has been modified. She has no recollection of the incident at all, so that's that, and no harm done. And a few of you are asking, is it possible that Vernon and Petunia were obliviated too? It seems not. They are angry. They are extremely angry, as Fudge says. So it seems as though, no, their memory has been allowed to persist. Why? We may ask. But perhaps obliviating memories is not done quite so casually as it may appear to be. This reminds me of a discussion that I had about, I guess the better part of a year ago, around the release of Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. And in Star Wars Episode 7, minor spoilers for some of you, I suppose, we meet a young stormtrooper who is given the name Finn, who rebels against the First Order, the kind of fragmentary continuation of the Empire within the Star Wars universe. He has a crisis of conscience, and he rebels. And there was a certain amount of criticism kind of leveled at the movie, triggered by the movie, that said, well, why does he just have to be exceptional? Why don't we have a kind of framework here? Why isn't there a real inciting incident for his crisis of conscience? Why doesn't he just, why doesn't he undergo some kind of experience that explains this motivation rather than it just being spontaneous? No other stormtrooper has ever had this experience. Why is Finn so special? And the answer to that is, okay, fair. We might motivate Finn more directly. We might motivate Finn more specifically, rather than just having him be appalled at the conduct and behavior of his fellow stormtroopers and of the First Order in general. Yes, we might motivate him more specifically. But later in the movie, just a few scenes later, there is a conversation in which we are told that Finn will be sent to re-education by the First Order. And the existence of structures and organizations for formal re-education among the First Order tells us outright that Finn is, in fact, not the first stormtrooper to have this crisis of conscience. Similarly, the existence of the Accidental Magic Reversal Squad. 2 members of the Accidental Magic Reversal Squad, we're told here, were dispatched to Privet Drive a few hours ago. A few hours ago means immediately after the incident. They are a fast response team. And the fact that they exist tells us explicitly that accidental magic happens all the time. And the fact that they're called the Accidental Magic Reversal Squad suggests that rather than being called the, emergency squad for cleaning up the messes of underage wizards, that kind of thing, tells us that perhaps all wizards are susceptible to sudden accidental magic. It may be that this is a very common problem in the wizarding world, and there is actually a proactive measure here, a proactive structure here that exists in order to counteract the damage done. It's entirely possible. I'm reading back here a lot of questions about obliviating the Dursleys. Jeff says no, obliviating the Dursleys because they're family. Yeah, I mean, Harry is in their care. They are his legal guardians, as Fudge will confirm later in this scene. They are his legal guardians, so it would be a little weird to obliviate even parts of their memory, I suppose. The fact that they're awful doesn't seem to really enter into it. Yes. Yes, as Nikki says, probably because they're the guardians and are aware of the wizarding world. Yeah, absolutely. That's good. Angela says, actually, I want to be a part of the Accidental Magic Squad, maybe. And Alexander says, they remind me of the FBI and the X-Files. Okay, here's the spin-off Harry Potter TV series, right? Because we've been talking about this for literally 20 years now. We've had the movies, we've had, Fantastic Beasts, we've had A Cursed Child, but we need a TV show because TV is where it's at. This is the golden age of TV, and we need like a real Harry Potter adaptation. That's your pitch. 2 mismatched partners. Maybe they even have a kind of, somewhat sparky kind of sexual attraction to one another, a la Mulder and Scully. 2 mismatched partners investigate things for the Accidental Magic Reversal Squad. There it is. Done. I will accept my check from HBO. Thank you very much. Like the Men in Black for Wizards, says Jamie. Yes, perfect, exactly. And as Aaron got there just a second before, Men in Black brackets robes. Yes, I like that very much. It would be like S.H.I.E.L.D., says Sarah. Yes, the Men in Purple, says Dylan. This is perfect. Good. That's exactly it. That is what we need to do. Okay, so we've got accidental magic, and even the notion of accidental magic kind of gives us that framework that we discussed earlier. Okay, we're now beginning to understand that there are at least two types of magic. There are formal spells. I guess we could also kind of include a third subset, which is kind of, magical effects, magical crafting, the crafting of potions and enchantments, things like that. So that perhaps is one category. Then you have the category of actual spells, conscious, formalized spell casting. And then you have this kind of wild magic, this accidental magic, wild magic that seems to happen in times of great emotional stress, great emotional upset and turmoil. That seems to be completely consistent. Yeah. But any way you cut it, it happens all the time. And, now we're going to learn what happens to Harry, because Harry is, understandably so, a little concerned about his punishment. So all that remains, said Fudge, now buttering himself a second crumpet, is to decide where you're going to spend the last 3 weeks of your vacation. I suggest you take a room here at the Leaky Cauldron and hang on, blurted Harry. What about my punishment? Fudge blinked. Punishment? I broke the law, Harry said. The decree for the restriction of underage wizardry. Oh, my dear boy, we're not going to punish you for a little thing like that, cried Fudge, waving his crumpet impatiently. It was an accident. We don't send people to Azkaban just for blowing up their aunts. But this didn't tally at all with Harry's past dealings with the Ministry of Magic. Last year, I got an official warning just because a house elf smashed a pudding in my uncle's house, he told Fudge, frowning. The Ministry of Magic said I'd be expelled from Hogwarts if there was any more magic there. Unless Harry's eyes were deceiving him, Fudge was suddenly looking awkward. Circumstances change, Harry. We have to take into account in the present climate. Surely you don't want to be expelled. Of course I don't, said Harry. Well, then, what's all the fuss about? Laughed Fudge. Now have a crumpet, Harry, while I go and see if Tom's got a room for you. We have here an interesting example of Rowling framing our perspective with more care and more emphasis than she usually does. This didn't tally at all with Harry's past dealings with the Ministry of Magic. I mean, Harry then goes on to explain, he goes on to expand that thought, but that's damn near telling, not showing. And that's pretty unusual in these kinds of circumstances in the Harry Potter novels. We're emphasizing this because it is simply so important. What we're doing here is directly casting a shadow over these structures of authority. We talked about the subversion of authority last time, right at the end of chapter 2. Not the inflation of Aunt Marge, but when Harry stands up to Vernon Dursley. He goes so far as to threaten Vernon Dursley. That was unthinkable in the first 2 books of the series because the authority of adults is unimpeachable. Even if those adults are untrustworthy, even if those adults are outright villainous, we still trust them. We are still told to trust them, told to obey them. In this book, we are already questioning authority structures themselves, and as I said earlier, the ways in which those sets of rules interact with the actual real world and with actual real people. We are supposed to be disquieted by this. We are supposed to be concerned by this. And on the one hand, that is about the Sirius Black story. That is about the prisoner of Azkaban story. This dangerous criminal has escaped from Azkaban and is now, as we'll learn in a few pages' time, going after Harry. So we're going to, bend the rules a little bit and whatever. We don't have to worry about a thing. We'll let this pass, Harry, as long as you're safe. That's the important thing. But Sirius Black escaped from Azkaban. And we specifically call out Azkaban here. Where is it? Yes. We don't send people to Azkaban just for blowing up their aunts. We don't imprison people for this. But, hey, the rules change. It's nothing to really worry about. The fluidity in this legalistic structure is supposed to be unsettling in 2 regards. Firstly, because it implies that Harry is in danger. To the careful reader, we will now be sensitive to the idea that Harry will be, exposed to danger in the course of the book. But at the same time, we are questioning the idea of imprisonment and justice itself. We are questioning the notions of crime and punishment in the wizarding world. There are laws, but they're not that important, really. I wouldn't worry about it. These things happen. There are rules, but hey, we can dismiss those really whenever we like. It's not, something that you should be concerned about. But when we're dealing with a prisoner escaped from Azkaban, a prisoner who we learn has been in Azkaban for a very long time, for a very grievous crime, any kind of shadow that is cast on the structures of law and punishment in the wizarding world is going to be significant, is going to be thematically weighty. So already here, we're having some trouble. Yeah. Dylan the Joel says, the ministry bends over backwards for Harry, and I'm still not sure why. He's a target, sure, but not a political one. Well, he kind of is a political one, honestly, because these are political appointments. And we must never forget, and God knows the book will never let us forget. In fact, we're going to address this explicitly in the next chapter, possibly even on the very next slide. Harry is the boy who lived. He is the most famous young wizard in the world. And if Sirius Black escapes from Azkaban and murders Harry Potter, there will be consequences. There will be political consequences that will trigger a whole wave of, lack of confidence in the Ministry of Magic. That may not be the entirety of the reason for the response, the justification of the response there, but I do think that it is significant. As Sean says here in the YouTube chat, it would hurt morale. Yes, I think that's absolutely true. Yeah. Yeah, good. Okay, let's keep moving on. I'm just taking so much time tonight. We've got so much to cover here. We are moving into chapter 4, though. We are moving into life in Diagon Alley, and this is Harry's idyllic summer experience. It took Harry several days to get used to his strange new freedom. Never before had he been able to get up whenever he wanted or eat whatever he fancied. He could even go wherever he pleased, as long as it was in Diagon Alley. And as this long cobbled street was packed with the most fascinating wizarding shops in the world, Harry felt no desire to break his word to Fudge and stray back into the Muggle world. Harry ate breakfast each morning in the Leaky Cauldron, where he liked watching the other guests. Funny little witches from the country up for a day's shopping, venerable-looking wizards arguing over the latest article in Transfiguration today, wild-looking warlocks, raucous dwarves, and once what looked suspiciously like a hag who ordered a plate of raw liver from behind a thick woolen balaclava. After breakfast, Harry would go out into the backyard, take out his wand, tap the third brick from the left above the trash bin, and stand back as the archway into Diagon Alley opened in the wall. Harry spent the long sunny days exploring the shops and eating under the brightly colored umbrellas outside cafes where his fellow diners were showing one another their purchases. "It's a lunoscope, old boy. No more messing around with the moonshots, see?" Or else discussing the case of Sirius Black. "Personally, I won't let any of the children out alone until he's back in Azkaban." Harry didn't have to do his homework under the blankets by flashlight anymore. Now he could sit in the bright sunshine outside Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor, finishing all of his essays with occasional help from Florian Fortescue himself, who, apart from knowing a great deal about medieval witch burnings, gave Harry free Sundays every half an hour. A couple of beats there, again, suggesting the constant advancement of wizarding culture. "It's a lunoscope, old boy. No more messing around with moon charts." See? The suggestion of a new invention that is moving the science and art of wizardry forward. Similarly, the existence of Transfiguration Today, some journal or magazine dedicated to the transfigurative arts, also suggestive that there are improvements being made all the time. Yeah. What's most interesting here for me, though, is Harry's integration into the world of Diagon Alley. Yes, he is here at the behest of the Ministry of Magic. So presumably people are going to be a little amenable to him anyway. People are going to be a little more permissive and understanding than they would otherwise be. But my reading of this beat with Florian Fortescue, who gives Harry free Sundays every half an hour and helps him with his homework, is not the kindness of a stranger to a young boy who is spending 3 weeks living in Diagon Alley. It's Harry's celebrity. I'm sure that as Harry sits outside the ice cream parlor, more than a few of the wizards who are walking down Diagon Alley take note of him and might be more inclined to pop into the ice cream parlor and enjoy something refreshing. Harry is a celebrity. And this is going to introduce, this observation introduces, or I guess reconfirms, one of the major themes that will develop through the rest of the series. It's not going to be terribly important in this book, but it is going to be very, very important later. Harry is special, but his celebrity is a curious thing because it is based on the circumstances of his birth rather than on his character or virtue or accomplishment or action. Harry is famous, but as we've seen before in the previous books, that has two consequences. The first is generally pretty good. Harry is the recipient of extra care and attention and support and indulgence. But on the other hand, the swing of popularity moves further and faster both for and against him. When it is thought that Harry might be the heir of Slytherin back in Chamber of Secrets, the speed with which Hogwarts turns against him is dizzying. And it turns against him not just because he's the heir of Slytherin, but because he's Harry Potter. He's the boy that everyone knows. He's the boy who lived. He is important as well as being famous. And Sabrina says exactly the right thought here. It's interesting that Harry doesn't seem to notice his celebrity in this chapter. I think he's usually pretty observant about it. In the context of school and his peers, sometimes, yes. But he's out in the wizarding world. And that first paragraph gives us a strong sense here of Harry's kind of liberation. Harry's, I don't know, his oh, Rohit says, "No, Alistair, don't ruin my vision of Florian Fortescue. I've always thought he's a kindly old man, not a keen business person." No. I'm sure that he is helping Harry out of the kindness of his heart. I'm sure that he is. But there is a fringe benefit here. And if nothing else, okay, picture this. If Ron was spending 3 weeks living in Diagon Alley, would Florian Fortescue be so accommodating? Possibly not. And it may just be that he gives Harry a chance because he's famous, because he's the boy who lived and then is immediately charmed by him, of course, because who isn't immediately charmed by Harry? That may well be the case. You can preserve your headcanon about Florian Fortescue all that you like. Don't worry about that too much. Yes. But here we see Harry's liberation from not just his muggle existence, not just the oppression of the Dursleys, but from the demands of childhood. It took Harry several days to get used to his strange new freedom. Never before had he been able to get up whenever he wanted or eat whatever he fancied. He could even go wherever he pleased as long as it was in Diagon Alley, and he doesn't care that it's in Diagon Alley because he's happy to be here. He can get up when he wants, eat what he wants, go where he wants. This isn't about liberation from his muggle life. This is about adulthood. Harry is now a fully actualized person who gets to make his own decisions and everything. Yes, he's made this agreement to stay in Diagon Alley, but he's not even tempted to break that, because where the hell else would he go? What would he do in Muggle London? He'd much rather stay here. But he is living an adult life, and that sense of himself as an adult, our first real, flash of Harry's adult identity that we get in the entire series, is critical. It absolutely speaks to this idea that Harry's adolescent experience is one of transformation as he's moving forward. Yeah. And Alexander calls out a really great point here in the YouTube chat too. This scene makes not going to Hogsmeade more dreadful. You're absolutely right? Because he's had his taste now. He's had his taste of freedom, and he knows what it can be like, and he can't share this with his friends. Not really. He will ultimately share a day with his friends right at the end of the vacation, but he can't go to Hogsmeade. He can't have that experience. He's sequestered away still. So it's given to him and then taken away. But that's actually the process of adolescence. Adolescence is not a smooth curve from dependence to independence. It's more of a jagged zigzag. And it's not even a smooth curve of being desirous of independence. Sometimes you'll have a tough day and you'll want to be, comforted and cared for again, as you were when you were small. That I don't think, and that may not in fact be even entirely limited to the adolescent experience. Yeah, exactly. Kimberly Slack says an adult with all of the freedoms and none of the responsibilities. Yes, that's fair. Yeah, good. All right. Let's Harry is a surprisingly budget conscious teenager, says Dylan here. Yes, he certainly is. He again has a sense now that actions that I take are going to have consequences. And again, we're seeing his maturity flourishing there. All right. It is 10:07 here in Oklahoma City, and we have a few more slides to get through. So let's move on. Harry goes to Flourish and Blotts and picks up his textbooks for the rest of the year. Luckily, he doesn't need to get another copy of the Monster Book of Monsters because he already has one. I like the running joke of how terrible and dangerous those books are. That works really quite beautifully for me. But here we get our first kind of suggestion that something greater is wrong. "Here you are," said the manager, who had climbed a set of steps to take down a thick, black-bound book. "Unfogging the Future. Very good guide to all your basic fortune-telling methods, palmistry and crystal balls, bird entrails." But Harry wasn't listening. His eyes had fallen on another book, which was among a display on a small table. "Death Omens. What to do when you know the worst is coming." "Oh, I wouldn't read that if I were you," said the manager lightly, looking to see what Harry was staring at. "You'll start seeing death omens everywhere. It's enough to frighten anyone to death." But Harry continued to stare at the front cover of the book. It showed a black dog, large as a bear with gleaming eyes. It looked oddly familiar. The manager pressed Unfogging the Future into Harry's hands. "Anything else?" he said. A very subtle callback to the creature that Harry saw back there at the beginning of tonight's reading, and an equally subtle piece of foreshadowing, at least a subtle piece of specific foreshadowing. What we get, though, is a really powerful thematic foreshadowing. We began tonight's reading with Harry asserting, perhaps insupportably, perhaps not, that things are as bad as they have ever been. Here I am, stranded in the Muggle world with nowhere to go. This is as bad as things have ever been. And now, death omens. What to do when you know the worst is coming. We are still pushing this brooding kind of malevolent sense of something lurking in the shadows into Harry's experience here. He sees the large, ominous-looking dog on the cover of this book. He draws the connection. But more than that, death omens, what to do when you know the worst is coming. This is a kind of thematic and kind of tonal foreshadowing almost. Harry's happy right now. He's gathering up his school supplies and everything is great, but that's not going to last. And in part, that's not going to last because that's not who Harry Potter is. I want to go back in the YouTube chat to Brittany, who called out, I like how we also have the Invisible Book of Invisibility, showing the Monster Book of Monsters isn't the only dumb thing. Yes, showing that the Monster Book of Monsters isn't the only dumb thing Wizards have done. Ordering 200 copies of the Invisible Book of Invisibility and then never being able to find the damn things. That's a pretty good joke. That's a solid joke right there. Yes. Um, Oh, this is interesting. Nicole asks, "What dog breed do you see in your head when you read about the Grimm or Sirius?" That's interesting. And Save Girl also has the excellent pull. Black dogs are a symbol of death and depression. Yes, they are. And we're going to look at that tonal aspect of Prisoner of Azkaban as we move forward. We're going to look at specifically next week when we introduce the the Azkaban guards, as they're referred to consistently and emphatically throughout this chapter, and somewhat distractingly throughout this chapter, when we meet the Dementors and we really start looking at the presence of depression as a kind of as a texture and a tone throughout this book, and also the role of depression in our understanding and accounting of these characters' experiences, then we'll definitely be able to call back to the specific application of the black dog there. Yes, that's very good. Good. Oh, Jamie says, I see him as a black Irish wolfhound. That's actually pretty close to my impression, too. That's very good. Black Mastiff, says Camille. Alexander says, I see him as the opposite of an English bulldog. Oh, an anti-bulldog. Yes, no, I can picture that perfectly. Rob says, too much Resident Evil and enemies literally called hellhounds as a kid. Yeah, that's good. And as Dylan says, the dog doesn't just foreshadow the end of the book, it foreshadows the whole series. Yes, this is, as I said last time, the point at which we really start foreshadowing the whole series. And this notion of Harry's celebrity isn't even going to be that important in the frame of this book. It's not going to be terribly significant. We're going to and when I say celebrity, I guess I'm conflating two ideas here. Harry's popular celebrity and his actual exceptionalism, those things which make him, unique in the wizarding world. We're going to expand from the previous two books, but we're not really going to explore that explicitly. We're going to do a little bit of that in Goblet of Fire, and then we're going to call it outright in Order of the Phoenix. We're going to get to an actual confrontation in which Harry kind of confronts his own exceptionalism and reveals, some of his internal fears. There's a lot to come. Yeah. We're going to continue to keep pushing on through all of the books, I promise you. Yes, yes. Tibetan Mastiffs, says Aaron, are giant. I have no idea what a Tibetan Mastiff looks like, but that sounds horrifying. Yes. And Rahit, yes. You guys think it's possible Harry has actual depression at any point in the series? I would like to put a pin in that and return to that possibly next week, but certainly later in the book. Yeah, good. Good. Okay. So that's our death omens. I just realized I kept that slide up forever. I'm sorry for that. And then we are reunited. As the days slipped by, Harry started looking wherever he went for a sign of Ron or Hermione. Plenty of Hogwarts students were arriving in Diagon Alley now with the start of term so near. Harry met Seamus Finnegan and Dean Thomas, his fellow Gryffindors, in quality Quidditch supplies, where they too were ogling the firebolt. He also ran into the real Neville Longbottom, a round-faced, forgetful boy outside Flourish and Blots. Harry didn't stop to chat. Neville appeared to have mislaid his book list and was being told off by his very formidable-looking grandmother. Harry hoped she never found out he'd pretended to be Neville while on the run from the Ministry of Magic. Harry woke up on the last day of the holidays thinking he would at least meet Ron and Hermione tomorrow on the Hogwarts Express. He got up, dressed, went for a last look at the firebolt, and was just wondering where he'd have lunch when someone yelled his name and he turned. Harry! Harry! They were there. Both of them, sitting outside Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor, Ron looking incredibly freckly, Hermione very brown, both waving frantically at him. A moment of reunification here that I think feels pretty good, feels pretty warming, and we're emphasizing at this point Harry's special connection with Ron and Hermione. He's in the wizarding world now. He's also meeting his fellow students, Seamus and Dean and Neville. But it's Ron and Hermione who really count. It is the other two parts of Harry, or from another perspective, I suppose, it is the two parts of Harry, the two sides of Harry's persona, the two sides of his nature there. There's so much to love about this. There's so much heartwarming about this. He's just strolling down, probably going to take a look at the firebolt, then pick where I'm going to have lunch. Harry is just the idle rich here in Diagon Alley in the last week before school. I don't entirely understand why it is that he doesn't send an owl to Ron and Hermione to get a little more information, but that's fair. Nicole says in the YouTube chat here, thought I saw a Grimm one time on my deck when I flipped on a light one night, only to calm down and stare back at a large black cat. That is terrifying. That is absolutely terrifying, yes. And Rob calls out, Neville's grandmother just might be the best peripheral character in this or any book. That is very fair. Yes. Yes. Good. Excellent. Okay. Excellent. So this is our reunification. It's a very pleasant beat. We see how much Ron and Hermione mean to Harry, and then we kind of move through some of the business of the rest of the chapter. They go shopping. They go to the magical pet shop so that theoretically Hermione can get an owl. She doesn't get an owl. She gets Crookshanks. We take a look at Scabbers. We learn that Scabbers has been looking a little sickly of late, and also he is much older than a regular rat should be, which is just fine. Then we go back to the leaky cauldron, and we get this slide. At that moment, Mrs. Weasley entered the bar, laden with shopping bags and followed by the twins, Fred and George, who are about to start their 5th year at Hogwarts, the newly elected head boy, Percy, and the Weasleys' youngest child and only girl, Ginny. Ginny, who had always been very taken with Harry, seemed even more heartily embarrassed than usual when she saw him, perhaps because he had saved her life during their previous year at Hogwarts. She went very red and muttered, "Hello," without looking at him. Percy, however, held out his hand solemnly as though he and Harry had never met and said, "Harry, so nice to see you." "Hello, Percy," said Harry, trying not to laugh. You guys, we just love the Weasleys, right? We just adore the Weasleys. The warmth with which the Weasleys are described is just beautiful. As Rob says in the YouTube chat, even the narrator is making fun of Percy. Yes, that's a little unusual. The narrator will generally give us characterization, but isn't usually this playful with the characters. Fred and George, of course, pick up the baton here and start teasing Percy mercilessly. And all of this is just building our sense of this developing world. I love, though, the very quiet beat with Ginny here. It's so lovely. She, of course, hasn't seen Harry since the events in the Chamber of Secrets. I mean, since leaving Hogwarts at the end of the last year, anyway. I wonder how much Ginny has been thinking of Harry over the summer vacation. She went very red and muttered, "Hello," without looking at him. I find that an absolutely charming point. I am, as many of you know by now, I'm sure, pretty much Team Ginny. I kind of adore Ginny Weasley, but yes, good. Excellent. Oh, Becca says, I read the story of Ginny Weasley's perspective of Chamber of Secrets, and it was so fun. That's wonderful. Good. Sarah says, one of the next lines, it was rather like being introduced to the mayor, always made me laugh. I love JKR's sense of humor. Me too. I kind of just wanted to quote this entire thing. Yes, as Alison says, so disappointed you didn't include Fred and George's mocking of Percy. Hey, I am a man who knows his limits. I would have loved to quote this entire thing. I also didn't include the beat with Ron and Harry talking with Arthur about Sirius Black. But, you know, I knew that I would be getting here at around 10:18 p.m. and still have a couple of slides to go. So I had to be a little judicious. Yes, a little judicious. The Ocean Palace says the Weasleys are great except Percy. I think I would argue. I also kind of love Percy. I mean, he's not. He's awful. He's kind of awful. He's inordinately pompous, but I enjoy Percy, I think is perhaps more fair to say. Yes. Jamie says, I'm surprised by this. I love the book version of Ginny. Movie Ginny was an utter disappointment. I'm surprised by that. I actually find movie Ginny quite charming. I mean, you're right. She's not book Ginny, but, you know, who is? Who really is? Yes, good. The real test, says Josh, is how you imitate Mrs. Weasley. I'm up to that test, Josh. Let's move on to our next slide. Because Harry is going to eavesdrop on a conversation again, as Harry so often does. There was a thud on wood, and Harry was sure Mr. Weasley had banged his fist on the table. Molly, how many times do I have to tell you? They didn't report it in the press because Fudge wanted it kept quiet. But Fudge went out to Azkaban the night Black escaped. The guards told Fudge that Black's been talking in his sleep for a while now. Always the same words. He's at Hogwarts. He's at Hogwarts. Black is deranged, Molly. And he wants Harry dead. If you ask me, he thinks murdering Harry will bring you-know-who back to power. Black lost everything the night Harry stopped you-know-who. And he's had 12 years alone in Azkaban to brood on that. There was a silence. Harry leaned still closer to the door, desperate to hear more. Well, Arthur, you must do what you think is right, but you're forgetting Albus Dumbledore. I don't think anything could hurt Harry at Hogwarts while Dumbledore's headmaster. I suppose he knows all about this. Of course he knows. We had to ask him if he minds the Azkaban guards stationing themselves around the entrances to the school grounds. He wasn't happy about it, but he agreed. Not happy? Why shouldn't he be happy if they're there to catch Black? Dumbledore isn't fond of the Azkaban guards, said Mr. Weasley heavily. Nor am I, if it comes to that. But when you're dealing with a wizard like Black, you sometimes have to join forces with those you'd rather avoid. If they save Harry, then I will never say another word against them, said Mr. Weasley wearily. It's late, Molly. We'd better go up. My Love of Arthur and Molly Weasley. Just the best. Just the best. Aaron asks, how did the guards communicate with Fudge? See, here's an interesting question. What did J.K. Rowling make of the Dementors? And I'm just going to jump ahead. Next week's reading, you guys, we're going to meet the Dementors. Don't worry, they're the Azkaban guards. If you haven't read ahead, I don't think that there's anyone in the audience who hasn't yet read ahead. If you haven't read ahead, don't worry, I'm not spoiling anything. But communication, not their strong point, okay? But here we're referring consistently to Azkaban guards. Are we doing that in order to preserve the mystery of the Dementors so that when the Dementors show up, we aren't necessarily thinking, oh, okay, that's probably an Azkaban guard. They're weird supernatural beings. That seems completely fine. Or is it possible that Rowling just didn't have a strong sense of the Dementors when she was writing these chapters? I'm more inclined to the former than the latter, partly because the introduction of the Dementors into the story in next week's reading is just breathtaking. I love that entire sequence. It is so powerful, so personal, so immediate. I'm really looking forward to that. And Angela says the most likely thing, how did they communicate? Are there human guards too? Yes. Partly, I think here, we're using Azkaban guards kind of metonymically here. We're using Azkaban guards to include Dementors. We're obviously talking about Dementors because Dementors are being stationed at the entrances to the school grounds at Hogwarts. So we're definitely talking about Dementors. But we're also talking possibly about the kind of infrastructure that surrounds the Dementors. Presumably, there are wizards who work at Azkaban. There are wizards who can communicate with them, who can mediate between them and the Ministry of Magic. That seems to be implied here. But yeah, as Sean says, oh God, being a human guard at Azkaban would be the worst job. I like to think that they're super well paid and it's like a 2 days off, 5 days on kind of, 2 days on, 5 days off kind of situation. But yes, I mean, they may be preserved, yes. As Rahit says, I'm fairly certain Azkaban guards are mentioned in COS, at least Azkaban is. Azkaban certainly is. Hagrid is sent to Azkaban, which very strongly implies that Rowling did not know what Azkaban was back when she was writing Chamber of Secrets. She revises that idea too, which, as I said last time, and as I will continue to say throughout the entire series, it is completely fine. It is completely her right as an author to evolve her ideas as she's moving forward. Save Girl says in the YouTube chat, quote, but when you're dealing with a wizard like Black, you sometimes have to join forces with those you would rather avoid. That's such a compromising adult way of thinking. It is, and I would take that one step further. I don't think that it's just the adult instinct to compromise or a kind of pragmatic approach to life in the wizarding world. I think it's more than that. We're already, as I said, casting shadows over the legalistic structures that define, that support the wizarding world. If the rules can just be dismissed, if the rules can just be thrown out, if we're going to make deals and side bets with people that we would rather not deal with, certainly that we would rather not have hanging around our kids' school, if we're going to do that in order to be safe, in order to be secure, in order to feel as though we're doing all that we can, then perhaps we're addressing a larger problem. Perhaps we're addressing a larger corruption, or at least a kind of imperfection, a flawed system here, a mechanistically flawed system here. Again, this speaks to this core theme of crime and punishment, that in order for punishment to be just, two things must be true. The culprit must be guilty, and the system which administers the punishment must be itself just. If either one of those two things is untrue, then the punishment is unjust. That's the essential kind of transactive metric of a legalistic punishment system. And we can, of course, debate endlessly what is just and what is not just, where you draw the moral lines there. But those are the kind of philosophical constants that are required. The culprit must be guilty, otherwise necessarily any punishment is unjust. And the system kind of apportioning that punishment must be itself just, must be itself righteous, must be itself consistent and accountable and transparent, and all the things that a good criminal justice system should be, and not, for example, the kind of criminal justice system that can be thrown out the window because Cornelius Fudge is worried about Harry's safety but doesn't want to tell him yet about Sirius Black. There's a lot going on here. Again, I'm kind of emphasizing this very powerfully because this is going to be a slow burn theme through the entire novel. And of course, the parallels between Harry and Sirius are more striking in this week's reading than last week's reading. Harry is alone and isolated in a dark place, and then he gains his freedom. Harry's walking around Diagon Alley, suddenly free, after being restricted and constrained for the whole summer. But, you know, metaphorically, the symbolism is there. He's now free. He's out. He's back in the world, his real world, not the Muggle world, but the Wizarding world. We're drawing comparison after comparison with Sirius. And this is the point, this overheard conversation between Arthur and Molly, where, of course, our fears are confirmed. He's coming for Harry. He's at Hogwarts. He's at Hogwarts. The worst criminal that there has ever been, the greatest associate and ally of Lord Voldemort, is now coming for Harry. And that's going to be the frame. Yes, as Allison says, security and freedom don't always go hand in hand. See Captain America, the Winter Soldier. Yes, good, good. Yeah, we're drawing some stark comparisons here to the war on terror and our current, you know, security theater situation. Yeah, good. And the, you know, heightening of rhetoric too. Yeah, good. Okay, that is our discussion with Arthur and Molly Weasley. I do love that Arthur calls him you-know-who. Like, I don't love that. I'm very much side with Harry and side with, you know, Dumbledore, that actually names have a certain power, and that power can be taken as well as given by the use of a name. But I like that that Arthur rather uses you-know-who. Let's share our final slide of the evening. No, all in all, the thing that bothered Harry most was the fact that his chances of visiting Hogsmeade now looked like zero. Nobody would want Harry to leave the safety of the castle until Black was caught. In fact, Harry suspected his every move would be carefully watched until the danger had passed. He scowled at the dark ceiling. Did they think he couldn't look after himself? He'd escaped Lord Voldemort 3 times. He wasn't completely useless. Unbidden, the image of the beast in the shadows of Magnolia Crescent crossed his mind. What to do when you know the worst is coming? I'm not going to be murdered, Harry said out loud. That's the spirit, dear, said his mirror sleepily. The talking mirror joke there, good cap right on the end of the right on the end of the chapter. I like that quite a lot. So here we see what is important to Harry. And so often we understand what matters most to a character through their goals, through their actions. What is it that they want? How do they react to the circumstances which face them? Harry has just been told that the most infamous prisoner in Azkaban is now loose and is now hunting him, and he's not worried, not really worried. He's distracted right now with the thought that he can't go to Hogsmeade. Nobody would want Harry to leave the safety of the castle until Black was caught. In fact, Harry suspected his every move would be carefully watched until the danger had passed. That is to say that while Sirius is free, Harry is not. That's the central opposition here. Harry is being imprisoned by the freedom of Sirius Black. He scowls at the dark ceiling. Did they think he couldn't look after himself? He'd escaped Lord Voldemort 3 times. He wasn't completely useless. He's trying here to kind of reaffirm his own capability and his own luck, his hope, his special status. Not he had faced Lord Voldemort 3 times. He had defeated Lord Voldemort 3 times. He had escaped Lord Voldemort 3 times. Then, unbidden, the image of the beast in the shadows of Magnolia Crescent crossed his mind, and he draws that connection back to the Death Omens book. What to do when you know the worst is coming. And then he says out loud, I'm not going to be murdered. And who, we might ask, is Harry trying to convince there with that final beat? That, I think, is going to do it. Wow, we are right at time. Look at that. So I need to wrap up pretty quickly here. As ever, if you have thoughts about this week's reading, if you have thoughts about Prisoner of Azkaban as a whole, if you have thoughts about the whole series, you can get in touch with me. You can email pointnorthmedia@gmail.com. You can follow @pointnorthmedia on Twitter. That's also, coincidentally, where you will get announcements about scheduling changes, if any scheduling changes are necessary, and occasionally they are. I apologize for that. Or you can head on over to pointnorthmedia.com, where you can find a ton more information. You can also, if you head on over to pointnorthmedia.com and click the classes tab at the top, you will find that all of my classes are currently on big summer sale. Like Harry celebrating his last 3 weeks in Diagon Alley, I am celebrating the hopefully imminent end of summer here in Oklahoma City, because you guys, this weather is not good for my Scottish constitution. So I'm looking forward to the end of summer by taking at least 25% off the cost of all the classes, including the most recent critical reading class, which was a really great class. That's a 4-session 8-hour class that will give you all the tools that you need to look critically at your favorite stories, to understand their mechanisms, to take them apart, to gain a greater appreciation for short stories and for poetry, to be able to break down imagery and metaphor. It was a really, really fun class that's available now over at pointnorthmedia.com. Next week, let me call up the slide here so that I can show you chapters 5 and 6, The Dementor and Talons and Tea Leaves. We finally make it to Hogwarts. That's Tuesday, August 22nd, as I said, at 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central. That's going to be our regular time slot for at least the next couple of weeks. And that is going to do it for tonight. Thank you all so much for being here. I hope that everyone who was here, Josh and Carolina and Alexander and Rob, I hope you guys had a really good time. I hope you will come back and join us again next week. The podcast version will be available in the very near future. And I will talk to you all again soon. Until then, take care.